When you interact with other people, do you force them to accept your ways? Do you issue them orders and threaten them if they don't comply? Probably not. That would be considered antisocial behavior. Yet for a few people in any country, imposing their will on others is their job. Until recently in the US, the political system provided some minor constraints on the power of the state to do whatever violence it wants to whoever it wants. Now those constraints are gone, along with all the freedom Americans used to take for granted. Where did democracy go? What are the consequences of this new authoritarianism? Is there still a way to stop these people? Can we at least talk about it? I'm Chris, and welcome back to the channel with a fresh and sometimes even accurate perspective. So what does authoritarian mean? You might say it means forcing people to do stuff, probably backed by a threat. It's about relationships. The individual is subjugated to someone else's will. If you're my slave, or my prisoner, or if I'm just your domineering teacher, boss, spouse, or parent, I have power over you and use it as a matter of course in our relationship. That would make me an authoritarian, and our situation authoritarianism. I think all forms of authoritarianism matter and should be questioned and probably eliminated. This whole channel is about how people in the modern world can emancipate themselves in every way. But usually when people use the word authoritarianism, they're talking about a political system, like a country, so that's what this video will be about. Some people only use the word for clear examples of authoritarianism, like slavery and dictatorship, but I think of authoritarianism as a question of degree. How many of the tools of authority are being used, and how? Some people would contrast democracy as we know it with authoritarianism, which would mean dictatorship. But for most intents and purposes, a democratic state is nearly as authoritarian as a dictatorship. Authoritarian state is redundant. Democracy and dictatorship alike criminalize a wide range of human behavior, reducing most people's choices in life to working for someone or something that pays them less than the value of their labor, going to prison, or living in the street. Both categories of state create underclasses, groups we're supposed to fear and despise to draw attention away from the ruling class. Democracy coexists with slavery, for example, so there might be a population of enslaved people for whom there is no democracy, while another group is living relatively free, at least free enough to walk away from work. That is clearly the case today, as enslaved people around the world make so much of what we consume. Democracy coexists with mass criminalization, ensuring a minimum percentage of the population is always in the prison system, in order to keep a whole race or class of people terrified so most of them never step out of line. People designated criminals have to accept whatever's done to them, and free people cheer it on. Democracy coexists with capitalism, which empowers a small class to own everything and rule everyone, while the rest of us have the democratic right to vote and not much else. Is it democracy when people are beaten and caged for asking for the rights the state assured them they already had? Everything the state does is for concentrating power, carrying out its policies, or legitimizing its actions. It exists to rule people. The agencies that grant the powers Trump is using have been built up over decades or centuries. They haven't been warped and corrupted, and that's why they're being used for authoritarian purposes. Authoritarianism has always been their purpose. So for enforcement, you've got police, military, spies, and other law enforcement or security services, including private military contractors and security guards. I'm gonna call them all police. They all serve the same basic purpose, physically protecting the interests of the people who own everything, putting their bodies between the property of the wealthy and the rest of us, and scaring us into obeying. The more violent and oppressive the police get, for example, when they reach the point of forcibly breaking up nonviolent protests and even feeding the hungry, the more power they need. They need more officers, better equipment, more surveillance, more anonymity, hence the masks. But you aren't allowed your anonymity, hence the mask bans. Power means legal immunity. In pursuing justice against homeless people and black teenagers and indigenous protesters, the police are going to use a lot of violence. They might feel the need to put a dozen bullets in someone for sitting in the way of bulldozers. They're gonna need to lie about what happened and why they did it. They're gonna need their bosses to support them with laws and appointments that guarantee they don't have to worry about facing consequences for their actions. But as you can read in any political science textbook, states rely on both force and consent. I wouldn't use the word consent myself because it's not consent if it's coerced. Rather than consent, I would say states rely on our complicity, approval, or just surrender to what seems like the inevitable. The state has to make us think our best option is to participate in the system the way the ruling class wants us to. The threat of police violence is presumably the biggest consideration, but how else does the state get our complicity, approval, and surrender? On this channel, I talk a lot about indoctrination, propaganda, and ideology, which to an extent all mean the same. They're hard to see because of how normal everything seems on the surface. That's because we're indoctrinated from birth. At home, at school, at work, and at the movies, the messages are the same. Earn, spend, consume, repeat forever. Sure, some art with subversive messages slips into the mainstream, but the message soon gets co-opted and commodified, so even the subversive ends up reproducing capital. The illusion is never supposed to break. You're not supposed to think the law and the state could be wrong, that there could be some other way to organize society. You're not supposed to learn there's more than life to money and work and family, or if there is, it's unattainable. You're not supposed to know other people around the world are in the same boat as you, but to see them as inferior and scary. You're not supposed to want something better for others, just for yourself. I think anyone can learn to see through these illusions as long as they have enough opportunities to, like by doing a lot of reading, knowing the right people, living in different places, or just observing without prejudice. I myself needed all those things, and I'm not finished learning by any means. Many people who learn to see more clearly begin to dissent, and that's why we need authoritarianism. Because the ruling class considers a country, maybe even the whole world nowadays, as its own private property. If you aren't acting within the very limited range of behaviors they allow you to anywhere on their property, you need to be punished. As economic conditions deteriorate, which they invariably do, more people dissent. Wealth keeps getting more concentrated in fewer hands, and poverty spreads to more people. So dissent is normal. But if more people dissent, more people need to be punished. In many places, dissent is forbidden. In the US, Canada, and Europe, only expressing dissent in a way that might have some effect is forbidden. The more power and wealth people have, the more police they need, because it means their property is everywhere. Corporations, city hall, wealthy neighborhoods, and poor people are everywhere else, so they need cops there too. Lots of companies depend on prison slave labor. One symptom of turning everything into property is people losing their homes. Homelessness has many causes, but the main ones are higher rent and lower ability to pay rent. A rise in homelessness is a sign that landlords, who, let's remember, don't just own apartments and houses, but all the office buildings too, are getting richer. The more they own, the fewer options everyone else has, so the more they can charge for rent. The police work for the landlords by enforcing property laws. You can't go to most of the city because it's privately owned. If you're not there to buy, the police might come and physically remove you, even if you have nowhere else to go. Landlords don't care, and thanks to our indoctrination, us non-property owning people don't care either. We've been taught to look down on the homeless and all the victims of the system. They must only be homeless because they broke some rule, like the rule of making more money every month to keep up with inflation, or the rule of saving money you don't have for a rainy day that comes every day. That's our indoctrination talking. Indoctrination is about dividing us against each other in favor of the ruling institutions. We get taught there's only so much to go around, and our group deserves first priority. With each oppressive ideology, the pool of people we're supposed to sympathize with gets smaller. Racism is something you have to be taught. They don't conform to our institutions the way we do, so they're the problem. We learn to look down on poor and disabled people, to claim, whether we know them or not, that they're not contributing to society. We're supposed to care about this abstract concept of society, or Western civilization, but not about actual people. We don't care about unhoused people, we just care about the law, even when it's the law that put these people in the street and will do it to you if you don't pay. But we've been taught to believe the law is supreme. Whatever it says, however it ruins people's lives. As long as it doesn't affect me. We don't care about refugees, we care about whiteness. That's why there was no debate about letting Ukrainian refugees into North America and Europe, but when it's refugees from conflicts white people started in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, there's never-ending debate. We let people die in the desert and the sea. Entire fascist movements spring up because God forbid some brown people move in next door. A lot of indoctrination is defining words for us. So our country is a democracy by definition. No matter what happens, no matter how much wealth the wealthy own and how little power anyone else has, however divided and brainwashed the people are, we're free and democratic, and at least we're not that country. I don't know about you, but I've been trained when I think of authoritarianism, or especially totalitarianism, to think of the Soviet Union. Why was the Soviet Union bad? Because only a few people had all the power. Well, many people who use the specter of communism to scare you into voting Republican are cheering on the accumulation of power in the hands of a tiny club of billionaires. How could they possibly be against one but not the other? Are things bad in one place but justified in another? Is it just the aesthetic you prefer? Is it okay to disappear people when it's ICE, just not when it's the KGB? Or is it that you're fine with a few guys having all the power as long as they use some of it to get rid of all the brown people? Well, it's probably not you, but you know there are millions of people in the US and elsewhere who are willing to spend trillions of dollars erecting a police state for that purpose. If people are to be tricked into wanting an ethno-state or just surrendering, they need constant manipulation. The Trump government has transformed the meanings of words. Invasion now means brown people moving. The government is planning to kidnap and transport and ruin the lives of millions of people living in the US to stop brown people moving. It's also considering invading a bunch of other places, but it won't use that word because it'll be white people leading the charge. Refugee now means white racists who want to move to the US. And Trump's gang have decided anti-Semitism means any criticism of Israel, and that this particular brand of racism warrants a lifetime stint in a gulag. Their definition doesn't cover actual anti-Semitism. This is a tweet from one of the refugees. The US corporate news media are not really helping because even the ones who haven't capitulated to Trump are still talking about everything through a liberal framework when it's no longer relevant because liberalism is dead. They're not talking about what's going on with the urgency it demands. They keep saying things might be illegal or unconstitutional when the law doesn't seem to be stopping the government from doing anything. Likewise, you can expose his lies all day, but that doesn't stop Trump. The corporate media will never encourage the kind of action it'll take to stop the regime. It'll provide an outlet for our anger as we fume at home alone instead of going out into the street. And some people couldn't care less that he lies as long as he continues to ethnically cleanse the continent. Because while many of us are simply misinformed, there is some number of people who just love cruelty. They might have had violent childhoods or suffer from some suppressed trauma, but some people support the system because it's based on cruelty. They join the right wing because they know the right acts out of pure malice and bitterness and justifies it later. But you don't have to be right-wing to be cruel. I feel cruel when I try to put the suffering of people around me out of my mind, or if I justify it because it's legal or supposed to be this way or good for the economy. Normal life requires avoiding the people we'd rather not think about. I just don't think it has to be this way. Once the ideological groundwork has been laid and enough people believe they have a country and a way of life, the state manufactures a threat to it all. It might create one indirectly, like it did with the 9/11 hijackers, but as the whole world has seen from watching the US over the past year, the threat might be complete fabrication.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats, they're eating...
But if it can convince enough people they face an existential threat or that they would benefit from the con, the state might announce it's suspending freedom. It's just temporary, of course, until the state solves the problem, which in the US means once it's created a white ethno-state. This is the real great replacement, by the way, trying to remove anyone who isn't a straight white person from a whole continent. Every right-wing accusation is a confession. Given most Americans probably don't want an ethno-state, they have to be coerced harder than ever. That's why the White House is using people from various law enforcement agencies, telling them to put on a shirt without a badge and go out and round up its enemies. Now Trump is in power, law enforcement can do anything they want to their victims' bodies and get away with it. That will be one effect of the official end to habeas corpus. In case you didn't know, habeas corpus is a legal doctrine dating back nearly 1,000 years to the effect that law enforcement isn't supposed to hold you for more than 24 hours without charge. It's enshrined in US law and is widely considered absolute in international law. And this reanimated corpse of Goebbels stated they're throwing it away. Because governments don't say they're going authoritarian. They announce a state of exception. In the 1920s, German political theorist Carl Schmitt, on the right, introduced the term state of exception to describe the suspension of customary liberties in times of crisis. It can be temporary. Think FDR serving 4 terms because of World War II. If the crisis threatens the existence of the state, like if the president says we're being invaded, he can take over as dictator. Think Hitler and the Reichstag fire. His dictatorship was brought down by force, like most of them. Schmitt joined the Nazi Party in 1933 and supported Hitler for years until he was kicked out, as people with minds of their own always are. The US has experienced a state of exception several times before. It was at war with Japan, so it put 120,000 Japanese Americans into concentration camps. It felt vaguely threatened by the left wing, so it criminalized being a member of a leftist organization. Its war on Vietnam was under attack domestically, so it declared war on drugs. It was hit with a single terrorist attack, so it started detaining people for years without trial. The tools of authoritarianism have always been there, and they've been used. A month ago, I made a video on some of the terrifying things the Trump government is doing to millions of people living in the US, so you can check it out. But of course, the news moves fast, and states trying to grab every scrap of power they can move even faster. Couple of quick updates. Stephen Miller says no more rights for anyone, and if you say I look like him, I'll come for you in the middle of the night. And Marco Rubio says they'll be targeting people for thought crimes. They've already begun implementing these rules, as we know from cases like Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Öztürk, who were not charged with crimes, just with being mean to Israel, and were detained as a result. Rumeysa was let out, fortunately, but Mahmoud and thousands more languish in border dungeons. In their effort to crush dissent, Trump's people will use any justification and any amount of violence. The state of exception is already here. Power is like a virus, always spreading and expanding its reach as far as it can until collective action stops it. People who take power work full-time trying to expand their influence. That might mean personally enriching themselves, but it also means strengthening the institutions of rule that give them their power. They go to war and build empires just so more people have to submit to their will. More and more groups of people and ideas become the enemy to be conquered in the project of making everyone the same. Given the logic of power, maybe it was inevitable authoritarians would come for empathy. We saw it in public initially when Donald Trump was first running for office. He won by spreading contempt for everyone who wasn't a white man. Millions took his candidacy as a green light to be openly bigoted and cruel. The White House now posts videos of people being kidnapped in a bid to normalize hurting and humiliating people. Elon and other Nazi tech bros have come out against empathy and regularly show their contempt for everyone they aren't sucking up to. Joe Rogan interviewed Elon because Rogan loves platforming Nazis, and Elon said empathy is a weakness. At least that made his tears all the sweeter when just a couple of weeks later, Elon said he was sad people were laughing at him for losing money as people boycotted Tesla because he's a horrible person. Of course, people who want to control the state don't want you to empathize. Of course, the people talking about ending social programs people require to live want you to ignore everyone else's suffering. They don't want you to realize you're in the same boat. They don't want you to talk to each other, to stand up for each other, to organize and fight back. Ironically, they still appeal to your sense of empathy, but only for a very limited range of people. You're only supposed to empathize with people who are white and just break corporate laws. If you're an illegal criminal alien, we can't empathize with you, or we might get charged with providing material support to MS-13. And of course, this desire for institutionalized cruelty trickles down. People learn to identify identify with the institutions as opposed to their victims, and to justify keeping us divided. They opposed teaching about race and history so their kids never know the country is built on racism. They opposed gay and trans teachers and books because their kids would learn such people exist and are normal, not some object of discrimination. They appropriated the term cancel culture to say no one should face consequences for actions that hurt others. Then they stole the word woke to ridicule anyone showing empathy with marginalized people, to imply marginalized people should not appear in public life at all, then pass laws making it happen. These are disturbed people. People who cheer on any kind of violence as long as it's directed at an out-group. They've been indoctrinated over centuries to want to hurt people. Our real targets should be the institutions themselves, but we might have to stop these people any way we can in the meantime. So let's do it. But we're not going to fight fire with fire. We're going to fight it with water. Division is used to rule us, so we engage in solidarity, refusing to be divided from those in the same boat as us. Mutual aid is always necessary. Authoritarians rely on obedient soldiers and cops, so we agitate for disobedience to all institutions of oppression. Disobedience could be a refusal to follow orders. It could be organized violent rebellion. It could be something in between. We shouldn't rule out any of it. You can take a first step by talking about what's happening. That alone is more than most people are doing. There are really serious things going on in the US and all over the world that I think everyone should be talking about, but they're not. It's like they think if they keep their heads down, the problem will go away. Even people who talk about politics prefer not to talk about the serious issues, not to address the horrors that are going on. But that just makes the problem worse. If we're not talking, we're forgetting. We're surrendering. Don't let people surrender. Get in their faces. Make them think. Tell them they could be part of a movement that changes the course of history and saves countless lives, or they could do nothing and watch people suffer. When people say they're not interested in politics, ask them if it's politics that the US government is trafficking in human bodies. If they don't believe you, show them the evidence. I've got a bunch of it here. Then they'll say, but what can I do? There's always something you can do. I put a whole list in the description. Some people will never listen, or not until it's too late. Some of those people won't want to admit the truth to themselves. It's always more comfortable to live in a world that feels isolated from all the bad things going on elsewhere. But that world keeps getting smaller as the real world encroaches on it. If we let them, the new authoritarians will destroy everything worth living for. They'll make you have to lick their boots just to be allowed to eat. They'll never stop. Power is always concentrating. Concentrated power always means less freedom and more pain for someone else. Whereas if we decentralize power, if we organize on our own, provide for one another, and eventually dismantle this oppressive system, no one will have to suffer from it again. Well, that's how I think anyway. Thanks for listening.